evening, everyone. Welcome to our panel session on career opportunities in pharmaceutical supply chains. Thank you very much for joining us today. We also have audience who are joining us virtually, so welcome everyone who are online. My name is Canan Çorlu. I am a faculty member here at Metropolitan College, and I'm also the faculty coordinator for our brand new supply chain management program, and I'll be moderating today's session. Our agenda is as follows. We have three great panelists, and each of our panelists will talk about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will open up the floor for Q&A around 7 p.m. And the panel will end about 7:30 p.m. and we will have a reception in the hallway after the event. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our panelists tonight. So our first panelist is Kevin Umlauf. He is a senior business consultant with Sanofi Genzyme in Westborough, Massachusetts. His experience encompasses just about all aspects of supply chains, from customer sales to product delivery, and from strategic to operations planning. His experience in healthcare-related includes both medical devices and pharmaceuticals. He has been engaged in projects around the world that have transformed supply chains by incorporating various technologies and lean material flows. These efforts have led to shorter lead times, lower inventory levels, and improved order fill rates and cost savings. And he is a member of APEX. So welcome, Kevin. We're very glad to have you. And our second panelist is Emily Zhang. She's a consultant at Converge Consulting, working with life science companies to build, scale, and improve their supply chains. Her background in the healthcare sector encompasses both strategic and operations planning. She previously worked at Agios Pharmaceuticals, where, among other responsibilities, she was the project manager for all supply chain deliverables. And if it's not impressive enough, Emily was also a business lead at Imperial Health Sciences in Johannesburg, where her initiatives resulted in HIV and malaria patient treatments reaching thousands of hospitals and clinics. So welcome, Emily. We're very glad to have you. And our third panelist is Steve Cashton. Steve has 45 years of healthcare supply chain management experience. This includes top leadership positions at Partners, Tufts, and Beth Israel Medical Centers, as well as VP of Operations at Critical Care America, a large high-tech home care provider. In addition, Steve has held various supply chain operations positions at several community hospitals, as well as in pharmaceutical manufacturing, repackaging, and distribution. And many of you, I'm sure, also know Steve as a Met adjunct professor in the operations management course. He is also a member of our supply chain management industrial advisory board. So please join me welcoming all of our three panelists, including Steve. Thank you, Steve. And then I'm going to leave the panel to them until Q&A. So,
okay.
Want to start, Kevin?
I guess I'll go first. Kevin Umlauf, thanks for having me first off, and
Sure.
like the opportunity to get out and speak with young professionals coming up in supply chain. So I started my career many years ago. I stopped counting after about 25, I think. But I started in oil and gas business it was Mobil Oil. They had an operations management training program. And I ended up as a delivery supervisor at an oil and gas terminal in East Boston, right over by the airport. If you ever went over the Chelsea Creek drawbridge there, going into Chelsea, right through the tank farm, we brought in oil and gas from the Boston Harbor, and then I was involved in the delivery operation, so loading up the tanker trucks and getting it off to the service stations and inside of like 495. But that was my first kind of foray into supply chain. I later then went off in the same facility. They had lubricating oil blending and packaging plant. And I got involved as blending and packaging supervisor there. and that's where I got involved in really the materials planning aspect, and that kind of really stuck with me probably through the rest of my career. So it's all about coordinating materials, the labor, the equipment, in order to get the requirements so you could meet the customer demand, and that's really what supply chain is all about. So later on, I went into their headquarters, got involved in supply chain planning systems, then went off to the chemical industry, did more or less the same kind of work there, got involved with global ERP system implementation. So we put SAP in a chemical company. It was Roman Haas company at the time. They were since acquired by Dow Chemical. But we were engaged in a global project. It involved, it was 140 plants in 40 countries, and we put the same SAP system in every one of them. So I was a part of that team. I was a supply chain process lead, and I went around to US region, then we went to Europe region, then we went to Asia region. By the time we were all done, we had one complete system that had visibility for end-to-end supply chain. So it was a pretty good accomplishment. It took about 4.5 years. A lot of work getting that done. Following that, I went into paper industry for a while, and then after that is where it gets more towards the topic of tonight, which is more the healthcare pharma industry. So I spent about 5 years with Olympus Medical down in Southborough. And then following that, I joined Sanofi as a business process consultant. So I've been in pharma for about 18 months, but there's quite a bit of overlap between pharma and the medical devices in terms of working in a more regulated environment. I think that's what differentiates pharma and medical devices is the FDA regulatory component of managing your supply chain. They control changes very stringently. So any change to how you source materials or how you produce goods, or even sometimes in the distribution or certainly in the quality approvals, any change to that has to be re-registered in the different markets that you service the patients with. So that imposes a lot of change control and restriction on what you can and can't do in supply chain. So there's a lot of impact that you have to consider with the regulatory group. So that's what's kind of unique about pharma as well as medical devices. In any event, that's kind of a quick roundabout my background. So the thing I think that's kept me in supply chain throughout all these years is more or less the broad-based aspect that you get involved with. So supply chain, if you look at SCORE model, it's supply chain operations reference model. This is a framework that a lot of consultants use to go into a business and say, we're going to evaluate how you manage your supply chain on these dimensions. And the dimensions are plan, source, make, deliver, and return. And those are primary components in any supply chain that's engaged in, say, material management. And that's it kind of illustrates how you can get involved in just about every aspect of the way a business operates. So planning, coordinating material supply or scheduling, level loading capacity is one aspect. Trying to meet your financial targets comes from planning. So the sales and operations planning process is in that category. But then you get involved, make, deliver. These aspects are more the execution. So how do you do the production? How do you make the deliveries? And then sourcing, that's the purchasing component. How do I provide the materials that go into the goods and services that I produce? So all these components, it gives you a kind of a real broad foray into. So when you talk about career opportunities in supply chain, you're really looking at, A to Z. There's a broad range of places you can get involved with. And I would just encourage you to, get involved on the front lines, in any of those categories, and you can kind of take your career path and kind of, mold it from there. But you really do need to start with getting involved with any kind of business in those different categories, and then kind of find your way around, and then you can work your way from there. Skill set wise, supply chain involves a lot of data analysis. From forecasting what customers need to planning your materials, to just managing your inventories, all of these things, managing costs, certainly. All of it is very heavy computer system based, so you're going to get knee deep in ERP systems. You're going to have to be able to navigate the IT landscape to figure out, to get the information you need to make the decisions you need to have an efficient supply chain. Beyond that, there's some things I can share, I guess, when we wrap up a little bit in terms of career opportunities with Sanofi. They don't have a tremendous footprint in terms of new recruits right out of universities, but I can share with you a couple of avenues that might be a possibility for college grads or even internships before you graduate. So we can come back around to that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, definitely.
Thanks so much. I'm very, very happy to be following him.
Kevin.
Kevin, I was like, Kevin, Steve. Sorry. I'm very happy to be following.
Attorneys around.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I have a kind of different perspective. I think this is a great overview of the different paths out there. I think my background is a little bit different because I'm starting out. I started out in pharma fairly recently, and I think I'll be talking to it from that perspective of how do you there are a lot of different paths, there are a lot of different roles, there's a lot of expertise clearly from all of the different kind of levels that you can go within that. I guess, so my part, I'll give you a story about my completely not typical path through that. I think you've already heard that I spent a lot of time outside of the traditional supply chain function. And so how I navigated that, I think I go to a lot of career talks because I'm also still figuring out my own career. And I also planned a lot of how to make each step, because each step is important in how you tell your story. Just curious, how many people have taken a marketing class or have some experience with that? Okay, great. So just something to kind of plant the seed in, something, I know you probably have finals or a lot of homework, but one additional homework as you start thinking about career is that you're all going to be marketing experts in one particular product, and that product is you. So it's really hard, I think it's really hard to think about it that way. Like, it's not about, people should know me, or you get really discouraged because you're applying to things, or you want to get experience, but there's this catch-22 if you don't have the experience. And maybe once upon a time you were, you didn't have a master's, you're doing all of this coursework, but ultimately it's all about how you tell your story. So mine is also clearly going to be a work in progress, as you'll see, and I welcome any questions or feedback you have for me. So from my side, I did not come into supply chain directly. I studied liberal arts, I know. I studied international relations. I wanted to go into like pre-medical field. So as opposed to Kevin, I kind of stayed always within healthcare, but in very different roles. And I think you'll see that some people have like a similar, have been in materials planning or ERPs or implementation. And when you can talk to your experience, you have that functional expertise. And then within industries, you can mix and match, and but you have that base as your knowledge. And other people have I've always stayed within one general industry, but within that, I've had a variety of different roles. So I would encourage you to think about, if someone looked at your resume, if you were to be sitting up here talking about it, how would you explain what you've done up to now? Because I was also a master's in supply chain student. I was at the program in MIT, and that was my first time having a formal education in materials planning, in distribution, and it was a 1-year program. And I have to tell you, before I started there and before I started working in supply chain, I always had this idea of like, what do people even study? What do you study? How hard can it be, right? And sometimes you'll be with people who are interviewing who really don't have that expertise. I would make a quick plug for Apex that, at least here in Boston, people like really make that connection. So if that were something you were thinking about, ask around, look at different ways to get certified, because that might be helpful. But for me, I studied international affairs. I was an EMT in college. Then I joined the Clinton Foundation, working with governments and hospitals and clinics to ramp up and scale up their treatment programs. A lot around HIV, some with malaria, some with infectious diseases, but it kind of matters a little bit less what specific product it is, and you'll see that throughout pharma as well. People change, from oncology products to vaccines to whatnot, but the fundamental work is going to be a bit similar in terms of planning and mapping out your requirements, following through with implementation, all of those core skill sets. And again, for you, this is, really think about what your core skill sets are. And sometimes they'll match 100% with a job description, sometimes they won't. Sometimes it'll say that and you actually have already done it, but you just don't think about it that way. So just keep that in mind. So from the Clinton Foundation, I worked a lot sort of backwards in the supply chain, right? Because those are the end users who are using the products. How do you order enough? How do you get them across all of these different countries? So that was my first exposure to supply chain as a kind of discipline. From there, I worked at a 3PL for pharmaceuticals. We were the kind of distributors, wholesalers. I lived and worked in South Africa for 6 years, working on this and with the government. And we had a lot of government contracts. We responded to RFPs. We did a lot around business development. That was sort of a different function from, working with governments, doing the strategic planning with them. I had never worked in the private sector up to that point, and really thinking about how do we contain our own costs? How do we, leverage what services that we provide? What services do the clients want? That was really interesting as well. And it kind of informed a lot of what made me go into grad school. So I worked at each place for about 4 years in a bunch of different roles. Learned a lot, traveled a lot, worked with really great bosses. That is key. Please interview your bosses as much as they interview you. That is like a fundamental relationship that you really can't know beforehand, and it takes just a few bad bosses for you to realize that, maybe. And so from there, I was like, we're planning, for example, a route through Nigeria. We have to deliver to 4,000 sites, but we only have the vehicle for this many days. How do you make that work? How do you make it work geographically? How do you make it work with the amount of product you have? It was it made me really love supply chain, I have to say, because you're using geography, you're using math. It is so interdisciplinary and it's so collaborative, right? You're working with all of these different functions to make it happen. From there, I thought, okay, this is great. I could keep doing this. I'm finally feeling like I know what I'm doing. I'm interfacing between different functions, and that's a key thing as well. And that's something you learn. But I want to know how you do it properly. So I went to grad school. It was a fantastic platform to learn about not only how the disciplines that are here right now, the procurement and the supplier relations and et cetera, but really what's down in the future. As Kevin mentioned, analytics is going to be a huge piece of it. Everyone kind of more or less has the operations part down. It's really about optimizing it. Typically, especially in pharma, there is a process already to change the process. You're not going to be messing around with changing manufacturing sites. That doesn't happen in this world, right? Like, no. Even to save 1%, even to save 20%, and that was a struggle for me. I think coming out of school, you have this idea that, everyone wants to optimize it. And now, hopefully I don't offend anyone in the room, but like pharmaceutical supply chains are not exactly, like efficiency is not the goal. It really has a different focus. Like no one, I don't know, we can talk about it later, but that's not the same, like you're going to be studying a lot from consumer goods because that's the peak. You know, when you're sending out millions and millions and millions of cartons, that's a very different thing from this one thing that you cannot accept any kind of risk to your product, right? That's going into someone's body, and that's just, it's not an option. Again, from my mindset, from our training, that's not really the same thing. You know, that's you can't, it's not efficient, but it doesn't matter. So I learned a lot in grad school. I loved it. There's a lot you can do career-wise that you are not going to learn in school. In fact, the career advisor from my program, we're still in touch. I did a lot of advising for the next class of students. And what he said was really interesting. I don't know if you guys are having a similar mindset, but a lot of people come into school because they want to kind of reset. They've done something up to now, and they want to change to pharma. Or they've done a different, done a lot of consulting, and they want to get into industry. Whatever it is, what you learn in school is amazing, but sometimes it can also, from your new job, also your job on top of your job of being a student, is to find a job. And it is a job. It's serious. And no one's going to do that as well as you can. So I think and sometimes school can feel like a distraction from your job. You're all very smart and motivated, but just keep in mind that that is a job it doesn't come just organically. And your advisor in the career department is not going to just hand it, your perfect job on the plate, because you probably still have to do some thinking about what it is you're looking for. I made some slides for it just in case this presentation, and the best example I could think of, or analogy, I think all of you might be exposed somewhat to online dating. It is just like online dating. A lot of it is very similar. You really have to think about what do you want? What type of job? You have to ask a lot of questions about from people who have it already. And then what's gonna make someone swipe right on you, right? What? It's not about you. You want a job, that's cool, but what is it about you as a candidate that's gonna make them think okay, this person is worth talking to in person or on the phone. Probably the first one's still gonna be a phone, right? What's gonna make them swipe right on you? And really look at your own resume, think about that. And then the second part is, if you're fortunate enough and go through it, what's going to make you swipe right on them, right? That's a commitment on your side. You have to be a good employee, you have to show up, you have to learn stuff, you have to do stuff. It's a job. So why this job? This is an amazing job market in Boston, in our industry, really. There are jobs out there, but why would this particular one be the right one for you? So those are my overall. I have no idea what time-wise we're doing, but those are my general tips. From there, I went to from my own grad school, just jumping back, just to round it out. I went into industry because I wanted to be in Boston. I wanted to be in a supply chain function. I had a lot of project management, strategy planning background. But I was new to this industry completely. So at Agios, my boss, I sometimes even asked him, because here there's tons of people who have the exact experience you have, because this is a pretty closed market, right? And I asked him, why did you hire me? I have no idea why. And what he said was, number one, it was not clearly my industry experience, but he said, number one, you were very proactive in reaching out, in explaining, walking us through, and finding us even. I got that through an MIT person I cold emailed. I didn't know him. I just said, hi, you seem to know so-and-so. I stalked the heck out of people, trust me. And so that was number one. And number two, he said, I called all of your references and they said good things about you. Those two things. So I don't know. I hate to be at that, career thing being like networking is important, but unfortunately, you know, I think I'm a good example of that because I don't have the 20+ years of, you know, working through the different functions, like mastering it. That was not my profile, but I got into this industry through a different path. And from there, that was set me up. I worked on a launch of our new latest product for Agios. And there is some, you know, this is something that's pretty new. It was a very small company. Most people had not done it before. And that's how I got involved. And that is the type of experience that I bring now to my job, because that's what we do. We work with companies who are like, oh, wow, this, you know, cell metabolism thing is working. It's in fairly advanced in trials. We want to commercialize. We have no idea where to start. And that's what Converge does. And that's my role in it. I help with our senior consultants, do a lot of the planning and the implementation, and it's pretty awesome. So yeah, I'm going to stop now. Sorry. I hope I still left you some time.
I think so. Okay, I'm Steve Cashton. I teach here operations management. I see a few of my students here. There's a little extra credit in it for you. But my experience is a little different. I've had such a sort of a circuitous route through supply chain, starting out very early on when I was in college, undergraduate college. I worked at a local hospital warehouse, receiving and picking orders and distributing, and that's really where I got bit by the supply chain bug. And from there, when I graduated, went on to a junior buyer position in a small company. From there, a purchasing supervisor, then moved on to another company to a purchasing manager, then a purchasing director in another organization, and then ultimately a director of materials management in another hospital, mostly community hospitals. From there, I moved into a new industry that was starting up, which was called home infusion therapy, that involved the compounding and mixture of drugs that were infused by a patient at home. The technology and the drugs allowed that to happen. These were procedures that were typically only done in a hospital. Hyperalimentation, total parenteral nutrition, those were things that you could only do in a hospital because they involved sophisticated equipment. And with the changes in equipment and the ability to teach patients how to use these pumps, both large volume pumps and portable infusion pumps, the patient could go home and return to work or just recover at home, which was a better place. Plus, it was less expensive for hospitals as an alternative to keeping them in the hospital. The patient could go home and they could free up a bed for another patient. I spent about 15 years in that business. In that business is where I got involved with supply chain as it relates to manufacturing, compounding, distribution, repackaging. And then spent about 15 years there, and a lot of consolidation then went on as the industry matured, a lot of acquisitions, and decided to get back into hospital supply chain, and worked for a number of years at Partners Healthcare, Tufts Medical Center, and most recently at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. And the hospital supply chain is probably one of the most, or the healthcare supply chain, not just hospital, but the healthcare supply chain is probably one of the most complex, if not the most complex supply chain. The products that are used are ordered by someone who is not going to ultimately receive the product. The doctor is going to order it. It's going to be used on the patient. The insurance company is going to pay for the product. It's pretty complex and very different from other types of industry. So, but in supply chain, in healthcare, especially in the hospital setting, hospital or alternate site setting, such as surgery centers or dialysis centers or clinics, there's a lot of supply chain activities and a lot of supply chain opportunities as this as that industry kind of advances. It was a very supply chain was pretty basic when I first started in it, mostly because the cost of goods that were used were paid for by the insurance companies. So hospitals got back what they spent early on. Reimbursement over the years has changed, where now that's not the case, and hospitals and healthcare organizations need to reduce cost. So they're looking at their supply chain as a strategic way to do that, to involve the supply chain now with the clinical care, to measure what physicians are doing, or surgeons are doing, what they're implanting, how efficient they are, what's the cost of the products that they're using. For example, in cardiac stents, physicians could use 2 stents, 3 stents, 4 stents, and that's measured now, so they know, what physicians are being the most efficient in how they implant products or how they do their procedures. So there are a number of opportunities in healthcare, and it is getting more sophisticated. But I think the opportunities are in the area where you really don't have to know, at least the opportunities I think for new graduates are in the area where you really don't need to know much about the market, the products, the suppliers. It's really at the level of analytics, and the other panelists have talked about that analytics seem to be really what's important now. Understanding, utilization and where the opportunities are. It's not so much that we're getting a better price for a product anymore. It's about utilization. The least expensive product you can use, you can buy, or the best price is the product you never use. So looking at utilization and reducing utilization is really where the opportunities are. And there are a number of organizations in healthcare, manufacturers, distributors, group purchasing organizations that really get integrated within their membership, their hospitals, the hospitals, and ultimately patients on the retail level, pharmacies on the retail level, and Walmart and other organizations are getting involved with that as well. So there are a number of opportunities, but I think where they exist, like I said, are in analytics, are in logistics, warehousing, distribution, inventory control, systems management of inventories. Those are really the initial opportunities, the best way to break into healthcare supply chain, whether it be pharmaceutical or medical, surgical, or any other aspect of it, equipment. Those are the areas. And to look at the organizations such as distributors, Cardinal Health and Owens & Minor and Medline. Those are 3 distributors, national distributors, and then there are local distributors. And the opportunities there are going to be around warehousing, distribution, transportation. And then there are group purchasing organizations. There are national group purchasing organizations, and there are local, regional, that usually affiliate themselves with national organizations. And there are opportunities there. They work with hospitals to help them reduce inventory, improve their supply chain, reduce costs through contracting. So there are a number of opportunities within group purchasing organizations. And as well as within hospitals. Hospitals are no longer, when I started out, there were a lot of small community hospitals, 200 beds, 300 beds. Now they're networks. Beth Israel, where I came from most recently, has about 600 beds in its Boston facility, but it's got another 1,000 beds in its affiliates throughout the community. So most of these hospital organizations have corporate functions that have things like human resources, IT, but supply chain is part of that as well. So you can work at the corporate level, assisting all of their member hospitals, their owned or affiliated hospitals, help them with their supply chain. So there's a lot of opportunities, but like I said, most of them are in the area. You don't have to know medical products. You don't have to know necessarily the healthcare industry or the suppliers in particular. You can start out with logistics, warehousing, distribution, analytics, and working at that level, and then work your way through. As you saw through my career, I kind of moved through as I learned more about the business. And that's really, I think, the route. There's no way you could get into the contracting and procurement aspect, because there's a lot of knowledge you need to have initially about the products, about the therapies, about how a hospital operates organizationally. But getting into the analytics and the logistics would be a good place to start. That's what I have.
All right, thank you so much. So, Kevin, would you like to come here and show?
Sure. What I don't have. I reached out to our HR group at Sanofi and just asked, do you have on-campus university recruiting? What can I share with a group like this regarding opportunities at Sanofi? And I don't want to overdo expectations here. There isn't a lot, particularly in this area, particularly around operations management. But there are some things that some folks might be interested in. So let me see if I can navigate here. So this link, I can post on my LinkedIn feed, but it's jobs.sanofi.us/university-US. What I'll do is I'll put this link and another link on my LinkedIn feed sometime tomorrow, hopefully by lunchtime. And if you want to go there, you'll be able to see it, and you'll be able to jump right onto these pages. But this gives you background about university recruiting at Sanofi, and it's got a number of jobs. And then you can click the links to see all the jobs. But a lot of it's in biologics, is what Genzyme is part of, the biologics division. A lot of it's postdoctoral, kind of more on the chemical side. But in terms of operations management, I'm going to check out early career talent programs. This gives you the overview of what kinds of programs are out there, and they're broader than just the the more heavy-duty science stuff. So there is a biologics sales associate program. This is in Cambridge. They have an MBA intern. It's like a summer intern program there. This industrial operations associate program. This is what industrial operations. That's where the production is occurring. This, unfortunately, the location on this particular opportunity is in Pennsylvania. So not all these are going to be Massachusetts. They're going to be all over the place. But this is a good way to get kind of associated with or familiar with what opportunities are out there. If you click view the program, it gives you more background. And then I thought there were links in here to go ahead and apply. If you go ahead, if you see all jobs, and you can do this by location. But if you find the one that makes sense, you've got the, you click on the link there. So this is the Commercial MBA Summer Associate Program, and that'll take you into a place where you can do the application.
The question, how many people are international students? Okay.
Yeah, you do need to be authorized to
Right.
work in the U.S.
Yeah.
to participate. So that's a caveat,
Yeah.
and that's why I kind of didn't want to kind of overbuild
Yeah.
expectations.
No,
But
just something to keep in mind, like before, just look, before you go down the path of filling out these very extensive applications.
read the requirements.
Yeah.
That'll tell you.
Because
Definitely,
you know,
for sure.
online filtering, like you check a box and it could send you to a pile you don't know about.
So the first link was more formal,
Yeah.
introductory type associate offering
Yep.
At different locations. This link is, so Sanofi also hires internships on a kind of a more of a one-off basis. And this is through, they've outsourced their talent acquisition, and there's a form you can fill out to build a profile in there. You're not going to be able to see specific opportunities here, but you can offer up your background. And then if these ad hoc type opportunities come up, they search this database for someone that has these interests, and they could call you later. So this is a thing where it's kind of more of a blind, put your name out there, build your profile. But it's also something that you can Then you can go do your networking. And you can look at where are the Sanofi manufacturing locations. Okay, Framingham and Alston. Okay, let me go to LinkedIn, look up those locations. Let me start digging for the individuals who are in materials management roles. Let me cold email them, say, do you guys have any kind of, do you do any internship things? If you kind of just assert yourself a little bit, sometimes they'll go, boy, you know, I've got this short-term project. I need to get some staffing. And you can say, look, I already got my profile on the system. You know, you can just look me up, and it might expedite things. So,
yeah, I think you never underestimate how people really want to help. If you have to actually say you need help, and I think that sometimes it's so hard to say, oh, but I don't know this person. You know, I'm taking up their time by contacting them, and you know, I always still feel embarrassed about that. But really, on the other end, I mean, I'm here because I got a cold email about it, and I said, oh, sure, I'd love to help. And people also love to talk about themselves. And everyone's career is a very personal thing, and you get to hear someone's story and how they got to where they came from, and it's interesting for you, and it's great for them as well. So you're doing someone a favor a lot of the time.
And there are dozens of pharma companies in the area that'll have this something similar. Sure. So you could do it with all of those, and many of them are international, so located all over the world.
Right. Yeah, it goes back to figuring out what you want. Do you want to work in Boston, or are you open on location? Do you have work citizenship? If not, that really changes your timeline, because you really have to have, you know, someone who's sponsoring you for H-1B and all of these other things. It probably also determines it, even if it doesn't say so here, though. A lot of the time with work authorization, it's just that they didn't think of it. Maybe they haven't ever hired anyone who's international. If you know the process and you know it's pretty straightforward, and they need to do A, B, and C, if they really like you, you know, it's worth a shot. But the online one, just think about it's an online system. There's some, you know, someone's developed some kind of like application portal where if you're just a name in that, that's very different from sitting in front of someone saying, like, these are the things I can do. So.
Yeah, and I think it's important, put your name in the system, but then reach out to the individuals and say, I just submitted the application, and here's why I'm interested, and here's why you should go look for me, because it doesn't always automatically pop up on someone's email inbox that you just applied. Right. So it's they have to make an effort to go look for the candidates that are in the portal to get it all started. And so making that connection through networking, you know, just reinforces the online application process.
Great, thank you so much. So let's thank our speakers. And I'd like to move to the Q&A session. So for those of you who have questions, I'd like to just ask you to move close to the microphone, please, just to line up here. And to kick off the Q&A, maybe I can ask a question first. And so many of our students, I know, they want to know, like, am I qualified for pharmaceutical supply chain? So what do you think are the main qualifications that they need to have? So because when we talk about pharma supply chain, so I think the first question that comes into mind, like, should I know something specific about pharma? You know, like about should I have a degree in biology? You know, so what do you think about this? What are the main qualifications that people look at to get the doors?
I mean, from my view, I've hired at entry level, and the qualifications are very much like what you alluded to, is taking some initiative and you know, following up and showing that you know, that responsiveness, you know, through the process, I think stands out. Nobody expects you know, folks without, you know, some basic professional education to have a lot, or experience to have, you know a lot about how the pharma industry operates. So the expectation with the employer isn't necessarily that you bring a lot of expertise. Otherwise, they'd be pulling from the professional ranks somewhere else if they needed.
Yeah, I think too the qualifications for entry level are pretty generic for any industry. Looking for business analytics, business skills, a business background, an MS degree or an MBA is helpful. But it's the entry level positions from at least from the healthcare side of things are pretty generic. There's no expectation that people know the products or the industry.
And I would encourage you to think beyond what it might say business experience, and you might think, oh, I don't have an experience in a business, but a lot of those skill sets, right? Project management, analysis of any kind. If you've done a research project where you had to work with people, I would say teamwork is a big part of something that people really value and is really important to be successful in your day-to-day job. Some evidence that you can keep to a timeline, keep yourself on track, manage your own time, manage other people, manage a project, see something through over many months. Maybe that was through your club, maybe that was through your volunteer, maybe you did it with your mom. Like, it doesn't matter as long as you can describe it. Like, think about what you've done and think about how it's relevant to the job. I think that part, you won't have, you might not know something about biologics, but if a program management job is what you're looking at, being able to connect what you've done up to now that could make you successful in program management would be helpful, because it's also a marketplace, right? They're looking at you versus 5 other people who are applying, 10 other people. Why would they go with someone who has no experience doing it? And you have to really, sell yourself. It's a terrible word, but gotta do it. Gotta play the game. Sorry.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Bill. I'm kind of like maybe an atypical candidate here. I moved to Boston about 3 years ago, and I fired out applications. I think I was at 50, 60 applications, and most of them turned out to be dead ends. And then I started working with a recruiter, and I got hit after hit on job, and I ultimately got placed in my job, which is kind of on the fringes of pharma right now. But I ended up using a recruiter, and I got fantastic results through that. Your various organizations, do you have partnerships with recruitment agencies? Is that an efficient way for us to go about advancing ourselves professionally? Or is it best to kind of foster that one-on-one relationship through an online portal and personalized communication? I do know that the recruiter I worked with, once I applied to Sanofi individually, I was forbidden to work with Beacon Hill staffing for Sanofi. So it's I needed to choose what path I needed to take right out of the gate. And I was wondering if you guys have recruiters that you work with, or if you feel that's an efficient way to move forward.
I think, at least on the healthcare and hospital side, that is a good way to work with somebody, because they know the industry. They're working with that particular account, whether it's a hospital group or a distributor or a manufacturer. And there are a number of ways to get into an organization. There may not be a position, but it could be a temp to hire relationship where there's a project. And once you get in there and can prove yourself on a particular project, there's a lot of temp to hire opportunities. So working with a recruit, and that's usually through a recruiter, or a temp agency. So that may be another way of looking at getting into an organization, especially on a project management.
And I kind of have a follow-up question as well. So like I said, I'm on the fringes of pharma right now. So I have experience in biologics and bioprocessing and things like that. But I can an inch deep and a mile wide. So I can speak the language, but I don't have the subject matter expertise. So I'm looking, my next job will be a job that will set the stage for my ultimate career position. So right now I'm debating whether to apply directly to pharmaceutical firms and move within an organization that way, where I imagine I would achieve kind of subject matter expertise in one way of doing things. Kind of a question for Emily is, I've also considered moving into the consulting space where I would become familiar with a bunch of different methodologies, whereas I could work on a bunch of different projects, have a more comprehensive understanding of the marketplace. Whereas if I went directly into Sanofi or directly into Pfizer, like in market access or something like that, I would work on maybe one project for 2 to 3 years and understand that completely. Whereas in the consulting space, it's a little bit more well-rounded. Does pharma play well with the consulting space? Is that a revolving door where folks can go in and out? Or is that something that, is that a branch in a career path?
I mean, I think you're talking to 3 consulting people, right? So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Sanofi's right now, we're engaged, we've engaged a number of consultants in a worldwide supply chain management system implementation. So they're actually hiring people from, and they require consulting background because they want people with broad background and that have done similar large enterprise system implementation. So you can't go wrong with I think a lot of the big consulting companies. You're going to get a broad range of experience. I think it's a personal choice in terms of, do I want to be on a plane traveling 5 days a week? You know, so it's a lifestyle decision more than it is what kind of experience and reward will you get out of it, your career, you know?
Yeah, I think there's more options beyond those 2. Yeah, certainly with, you know, the big consulting firms, you'll get a lot of experience. What I've heard is that you don't necessarily specialize in pharma out the gate. You could be working in retail, you could be working in consumer goods and electronics and et cetera, et cetera. And so that's something to consider. My personal experience is that people in pharma, because especially here in Boston, maybe it's different, but there are so many companies and people with that skill set already that, again, you're up against them when you're interviewing for a job. So, and we all take mental shortcuts, right? You see someone who has a name or knows somebody or does this thing that, you know, you are familiar with in a world that you know, and like after the first one, it's a whole different ballgame. So getting to that first one is important. I think for small pharma, like Agios was 400 to 500 people, could be in a different place. It's very different from big pharma. You can have lunch with the market access person or the pricing person. You're in the same meeting. In big pharma, it's thousands of people, and here, you know, it's not the same thing. So that's something to look at. Could be easier to move within functions. You know, the downside, the trade-off to that is that you could also not necessarily build any expertise. You could be fighting fires and doing everything because no one else is going to do it. That's kind of what, you know, the gamble that you take, which is where your boss is important and the culture is important. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, guys.
No problem.
Could I just go back to the headhunter question or the recruiter question?
Oh.
I've run into that throughout my career. If I work with a recruiter, should I apply directly to the company? I think that's a good point. But if there's a recruiter that has a specific role and they're specifically paid to find somebody for that job, then, you know, work with them. But most cases, they're kind of looking at the same job boards you are, and they're out trying to make money on trying to find somebody to fill that role. And they might have a connection in that company that they say, hey, I know this person. They might be trying to vie for that, you know, that they're going to get a commission on finding you. Yeah. So if you go directly, you know, if you have the contact within the business, you know, you don't always need the recruiter. If you don't have that, you know, sometimes that's a good way in. But recruiters are expensive, and a lot of HR departments don't really want
last resort.
You know, it's kind of a last resort. So just, I guess, no real good advice there. Just try any avenue you can, really, but just recognize that there's that kind of relationship, and you just got to be sensitive to the cost that recruiter brings.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? There was a couple of hands. Any other questions? No? Okay, so, all right, so I have one. So, what do you think, like, the main challenges that are facing the pharmaceutical supply chain leaders in the future? So, what should people get prepared for? More like future-related question.
I mean, for me, I came into pharma from outside, and I was really surprised when there wasn't really the focus on the same things in supply chain as in like consumer goods. There wasn't as much focused on the cost and the inventory turns and those type of typical supply chain performance measures that you'd use in any other industry. Pharma, the challenge is that you make the molecule in one location in one country, and then you might have the packaging facility at another location in another country, and then it might go to labeling in another location. And the time and complexity to navigate products through that maze just adds to a lot of delays in trying to get things through. To try and improve cycle time on end to end, it's very difficult. Then you run into different management structures and organizations govern each of these different aspects of the material flow. So you've got one set of managers working over the biologics molecule, you got another set of managers working over the packaging or the vial filling operation, you got yet another who are interested in doing the labeling and distribution. So, and you have to influence all these different parties, and they don't report to the same people, so it's really hard to get them. And when you want to have kind of like end-to-end supply chain discussion, you want to bring them all together, they're kind of like, well, you're just talking about the one product that they make at the molecule place, and we fill all the other products as well. So this is just a small slice of my business, and it's hard to get their attention. So I would say the challenge is learning how to understand, what drivers influence the folks that you need to influence, and getting to those drivers in order to get them to do the changes that you need to do. And that's very much a interpersonal skills, people relation skills, and then just kind of bringing what you need. You just got to tell them, this is what I really need, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, we're trying to help the patients here do it faster, do it better. And eventually you can bring them around, but it's just kind of navigating through that whole web. That's a real, I'd say, difference in supply chain pharma versus other industries I've been in.
Being, I think too, in hospitals, being a consumer of pharma, we see the issue being the ability to forecast better. I think, and capacity issues and inventory issues. There's been a lot of shortages of pharmaceuticals that the hospitals are experiencing for a lot of different reasons. But especially in the area of vaccines and certain antibiotics and other drugs, most recently the hurricane in Puerto Rico wiped out a number of manufacturing facilities, and particularly one that manufactures IV solutions. And so capacity was an issue. They had nowhere else to manufacture those products. So they basically could not supply things, and hospitals have been living for 2 or 3 years with other shortages, and then those shortages over the last year. So I think some of the challenges are better forecasting, and that's where opportunities may exist. Inventory management to make sure you have an adequate inventory, and then capacity to be able to fill those gaps when inventory and manufacturing is not available. So sitting on the consumer side, that's what we see pharma struggling with, and it ultimately affects then how on the hospital side, how we manage our inventories and how we plan ahead and have contingency plans and alternate vendors and whatever we can do to offset those issues.
And I mean, that's a perfect segue to what I was going to say, which, and definitely an area of opportunity is, I think I remember studying a lot about, having an agile and responsive supply chain is key, because you can do a lot of forecasting, but it'll always be a little bit different, and you can do the manufacturing. People have those, the fundamentals down, but communicating those two in a way that actually makes a difference. When your lead times are like 2, 3, 5 years, that becomes the real challenge. I think and that's a challenge that's already known. I think the challenge behind the challenge is now there are actually tools that could, right, like predictive analytics. People, and I can't tell you how many conferences I've been to about blockchain and AI, and the people who are the decision makers and the leaders, they know it's important. Like everybody knows it's important and incredibly powerful, but they don't know how. Like what does it look like? How can it help them? How does it do it without not, betraying patient-sensitive information? Like nobody wants to be accidentally leaking, sensitive information. That's going to be like, they know there's so much potential out there. The tools are now available. Other industries are able to try and create startups and try out different products and have this sense of things that don't work. But I think in the pharma industry, there's this sense that you could, I don't know, there isn't the same type of willing appetite for risk. But probably in your lifetime as a person in supply chain, I think it will happen, but no one knows what that looks like. And that could be your job. You could be, there are people and organizations and companies who are doing that. You could be part of that. So that's it.
Thank you so much. I guess we have a couple of questions over there. Yeah, I'd like to go ahead.
Hi, good evening. My name is Redmond. So I have a not really career-driven question. So obviously, pharma products are held to the highest standard because of safety issues. And like you said, it goes directly into human bodies. So what qualities are then, maybe price point or something like that, do you look for in suppliers? So like, aside from, the safety standard price point, is it customer service or like, is it reliability? Like you said, it's not efficient. So what criteria do you hold for your suppliers? That's the question.
Let me take it. So in our business, our suppliers are really held to the same standards we are in terms of their documented procedures and processes. So there's CGMP guidelines that govern whether a company has, the controls in place to manage, change, which is what introduces the issues that, you're trying to prevent. So really it's same manufacturing standards in a supplier as you would in the pharma manufacturing.
I've been surprised at the level of, I came from a kind of supplier side, and then I went to the manufacturer side, and now working with different, vendors of our own, and as also from consulting, working with our clients. It is such a team sport in that sense, because I was used to kind of government contracting where you have KPIs and you beat them, and it's kind of really I'm the client, I pay your bills, therefore you do A, B, and C. But here, it's almost sometimes invert. I'm like, wait, if you're trying to get your product made, and typically there are huge kind of contract manufacturers who do that, those are the suppliers, but they pretty much, they have such specialized equipment and processes and standards. There are only so many you can go to, and everybody goes to them. So if anything, I think reliability, your track record, your audit history, that's something that people look at a lot. If you were dinged by the FDA, that's probably not going to be you want to avoid working with people like that.
Sounds like it has like a really high entry barrier then.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question? Yeah.
Kevin, Emily, Steve, good evening. My name is Bobby Stone. I'm actually currently at Shriners Hospitals for Children in Boston. And I've been with supply chain for almost 5 years now. Started off green. I'm still kicking boxes. I'm still picking up boxes. One of their senior supply chain techs, actually their only senior supply chain technician. And, one of the things that I'm personally trying to figure out long-term is what are my potential career paths starting, trying to expand upon my current path. So my question to you all was, did your paths happen organically, or did you identify your strengths, and how did you go from point A to point C?
Mine was opportunistic. I just was just looking to advance, and whatever came up that would look like a move up, I took just to build my background and my resume. It's I think most people's career path is pretty circuitous. They go through a number of industries to get to where they are. But mine, I think, was just simply opportunistic. You look at the marketplace. With you, it's distributors, group purchasing organizations, and other hospitals, and just see what comes up in those areas. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, I think, and I go to a lot of career talks, so pretty much every person as a panelist will say, oh, it was a complete circuitous. You can connect the dots kind of in retrospect. But I think first you're doing exactly the right thing by being in school, building a skill set, getting that kind of qualification. And I think now it's also a golden opportunity, and this is a general, for everybody, being in school and having the resources that BU, or you said Northeastern as well, that your academic institution, that can be your backing and your kind of cover for doing so much, for talking to people, for reaching out and saying, I'm a student, I'm interested in this, I looked you up and you had some similar background to me, and then you went in this direction and I have no idea what that means. Like, do you think it's a good idea? No? Yes? You know what, if you knew, now knowing what you know, what would you do differently? I think there's a lot of value in your time now kind of doing that, because everybody, again, like in school, you're not talking to potential competitors, or you're talking to people who think you're trying to, get a job. I mean, down the line you could be, but like that is what it's about. I think, and having some idea of like, yeah, point C is something that you want. Figuring out what point C kind of looks like helps. Yeah, that would be my advice.
And also professional organizations, even though some of the local, with healthcare, it's NESHM, or some local ones, to be involved. Then you just get to see what's out there. You get to meet people who may be in a different position a year from now, looking to hire. So, those getting involved with organizations like that, professional organizations, I think is another good way to do it.
I think a good one of those is Institute of Business Forecasting, IBF. They have a certification program similar to APICS. They do conferences, that kind of thing. But there's a local chapter, and it's kind of a collaboration of industry, academic, and practitioners. And there's actually a search firm involved too. The LifeWork search head of that is on their board. So they bring a lot of good resources in terms of where that career path goes, what the network looks like, what some of those job titles look like. And it's really, look at the job titles in, you kind of understand the hospital organization and what the job titles look like, then broaden that out to other industry and see, in terms of inventory planner or buyer or purchasing manager or materials manager, and look at what those skill sets and qualifications are, and then look at how much, where are these located, where do you want to live, where do you want to work, how do you want your lifestyle to fit in with that, and then you'll start to get a target, and then start reaching out to the folks in that try to build the network, make the connections. But for me personally, I was always involved in bigger companies, and it's almost like you're expected to change jobs every couple of years. And they encourage relocations across the country into different countries. And it's just a matter of how much of that do you really want to take on, because you get settled in, you get a family, you get you get your roots planted, it's kind of harder to do that kind of thing. So it's I'd say balance of lifestyle decision and what do you need to get out of your career.
Were there any specific certifications or things like that that actually helped you kind of drive your path at all?
You know, I never did the APEX certification. I did do the, I got a graduate, I studied operations management and IT at WPI. So I got a master's degree there. And we did a lot of case studies there. I mean, the case studies, I don't know if you do case studies in a lot of your classes, but they feed you a lot of information. You got to sift it, boil it down, come up with the key points. That's a skill set. You know, is taking a complex problem, boiling it down to a couple key points and making a convincing argument. Here's what we need to do. I mean, the more times you do that, it's you know, muscle memory, you know, going through that exercise.
Yeah, I think APEX is a good one because it goes across all industries. That would be a good one. And then something specific to healthcare, like
ARM.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
So we have time for one last question.
How you doing? I'm Tony Hudgens. I was recently let go from my position as a supply chain and logistics coordinator. It wasn't in the same field as pharma, but with technology being a very integral part of everything going on nowadays, do you think that it's so I was let go due to automation. Is that something that's similarly happening in the pharma community? Because everything is going through with technology now, you know, so it's harder to keep your position if everything is becoming automated.
You know, machine learning, I think, is a reality in maybe some consumer good or more kind of repetitive type replenishment type approaches. Trying to come up with, you know, inventory targets involves looking at a lot of historical data, coming up with a lot of recommendations. Some of that stuff can be automated. I would say the thing that can't be automated is what you were alluding to, is you could be the one figuring out what technologies are we going to use and how do you use AI or how do you use the machine learning approach to supply chain. So knowing what you know, knowing how you got kind of displaced might be the kind of way to say, okay, I could go and show others how to, you know, displace. You be the one implementing the technology as opposed to kind of being displaced by it, you know.
Have you guys heard of Navision? Is that something that you guys use in your work at all, or no?
I've not heard. What's it? Division?
Navision, N-A-V.
Oh, Navision. I've not heard of that. Is it
What does it do?
software?
It's a supply chain. Yeah, it's a software for supply chain and logistics. It helps keep the quantity and the incoming and outgoing of everything accurate. And that's how, because it's growing, that's how the automation came about for moving me out essentially, you know. I don't really have an additional question. I just want to know if you had that too.
I've not heard of that one, but I know that, you know, with you know, there's all kinds of devices that can help track inventory now that makes it a lot less labor intensive. But it's try to get on the right side of technology so that you're the one implementing the technology versus, you know, the other way around.
Yeah.
And you're still working with people at the end of the day. I think especially, you know, you're studying these technologies and tools, but they're not going to, you know, get selected on their own. Like there's still people who have to do all of the things to get it in place. You know, the system will tell you one thing for forecasting, but someone has to look at it. Maybe one day, you know, it will be so intelligent that everything is just one seamless thing. But my personal view is that in pharma, it's going to be a while because that you still have the ultimate responsibility of, if there's a stock out, you know, everyone's very risk oriented in pharma. So there's always a risk of technology, right? Why don't we have, you know, it can take 1 million great autonomous vehicles, but one accident, which was probably caused by a human, and it's like, no, we can't accept that. So I think that first, for your job, I would think about what you really enjoyed, what you were good at in your job. Think about what you would want to see in your next one. And then I think in supply chain, it's easy to kind of think about it's the system, it's the tool, it's the numbers, but really it's the program management part. I cannot emphasize the interpersonal part enough. That is what will make you successful. And those two things are not mutually exclusive. And that is not a like, I'm good at it, you know, naturally. People learn it. People really apply themselves to study it and work at it. I saw my boss once who, you know, would kind of off the cuff deliver these amazing speeches. And I was always like, how do you do that? You're so natural, and he's funny, and he's articulate, and he's like, dude, like I practiced that like 5 times, right? Yeah, and he would tell me that, and I really appreciated it, because I think it's easy to assume that, oh, some people are just naturally good at it, and that's not really the case. And just working with people too. If you're looking in Boston, this is such a small world of people. I'm about to, after this panel, ask Kevin right now, like, oh, do you know these people that I think he might know? I was looking up this event, and there was a previous panel here, and all 3 people sitting at this table were people I had met before. So I actually sent your link to be like, oh, huh, you're on the BU website. Like that is how small. You'll see the same people in this small corner, like again and again. And then they'll be like, oh, you know, so-and-so was pretty great. And that's your in, really. So.
Yeah. And automation doesn't always eliminate jobs. It just might change a job. You just want to be in a position that you're one of the people that stays on for the care and feeding of a system, because every system needs somebody to operate it, manage it, feed it, you know. And so if you're in, you know, if your skill set is correct and you sell yourself, to use the same term, when it comes time to implement something like that, you could be the person who stays on to do the care and feeding of the system.
I do have one more, I apologize. So for the selling yourself, I have the 2 years experience in the supply chain logistics coordination, but I just finished my master's in healthcare administration. It's not necessarily supply chain, but I do have the experience in it. So selling myself on that is easier said than done, because of the healthcare administration, they want to know why I left from that. And I have the EMT background, such as you, Emily. So it's harder to get into selling that. And do you have any?
You may have more luck, though, staying in healthcare supply chain, if you want to stay in supply chain, because that healthcare administration won't be such a negative as if you're trying to get into some other field. And there are a lot of opportunities. You know, it's not just in hospitals, it's in those group purchasing organizations, consulting organizations, distributors, manufacturers. So, you know, you may want to kind of key on that for a while as you sell yourself, because that's a plus to have that health, to understand how an organization works is very, you know, it's helpful.
I hired when I was with Olympus in Southborough, I hired a demand planning analyst, and it was somebody that needed to be familiar with, you know, that relationship between us and the hospitals, and to understand what the customer demand trends were and what drove the variability and that kind of thing. So that I wouldn't think that that's a shortcoming. I think it could be applicable, like you said.
Right. Especially if you stay in that field, and there are a lot of areas to look at.
Great, thank you.
Just one last philosophical, like nothing is a minus in your story if you don't make it a minus. Everything is either neutral or something to like just, yeah, like you can spin is a terrible word, but like think about the story. Like that's you, right? You have to put yourself out there, and you get to frame whether or not it's a plus, what you learned, what you didn't. You learned something from everything, right? You gained experience in something. Every single day that you're studying or working or not working or looking for a job, it's all part of you. Like, don't discount, like, let other people do the rejection for you. Don't reject yourself right out the gate. You know, like really it's about, you have to go in there kind of targeting the right place within the supply chain that makes the most of your skills, like makes the most of what you have. Just like online dating, right? You're not going to suddenly become someone different from who you are. Like, well, you're you, but like, how do you make the most of what you have?
Yeah, don't apologize
Yeah.
in your example for having a healthcare degree. Talk about what's good about it, why you can bring those skills to some other, organization. Turn a negative into a positive.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it's time to wrap up. So let's thank our speakers again for their time. And thank you for attending. So please join us at the reception where you'll be able to ask any remaining questions and enjoy the food. So yeah, thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening.